study. So from a budget standpoint, I'm approved for, in that program of study, say, $5,000. But within that, I'm looking for the head savings and travel of $500. And I'm going to move that $500 and put it into equipment because that equipment is in over.
That's maintenance on your level. It's when it hits the OBMS budget where you don't have enough in purchase services to cover that. Then you've got to go back and re-evaluate the budget in the aggregate.
From a number standpoint, I do that. But when do I have to go in and say, I need to amend the application and get approval to move that 500 from one place in the budget to the other? Or, and then get how to amend it.
Okay. And I don't think half of the audience can hear the question, so let me just be clear. At what point in time do we have to get PED approval to move something within a program of study budget? Let me clarify that there's going to be two conditions that you have to think about. The first condition is it going to put me at is my expenditure going to place me in overexpending budget authority in OBMS? And if yes, you need to amend that application to amend your budget through OBMS. Okay? You can't expend more than you have budget authority for, whether it's in travel or purchase services. So that's one condition to say, I have to submit an amendment. The second condition where you have to submit an amendment is if you're changing the scope of what you were approved for. That we're either redacting and not implementing something we planned for, or that we're adding something new. So that's the second condition. If you're redacting or adding something new, you're changing the scope, and that requires the approval. But to say, well, I saved money on my welders here, even though I budgeted it for $1,000, I'm going to go spend it on oxyacetylene tanks over here within my same program, you don't necessarily have to have that budget approval unless you're changing, say, the aggregate number of acetylene tanks that you needed. You asked for 1, and now all of a sudden you need 15. Like, that's kind of substantial. Because we need the itemized list of what we're approving. And let me just tell you why, just to set it in context of why we need that approval. There are institutions in here that have not pulled out their daggers on me today, and I don't know why. Sharon, C&M, love you. Right? Claims for reimbursement are getting held up for weeks and sometimes months. And the reason for that is because the lack of clarity on the front end of what was agreed to in the project application. And in some cases, we have direct communication with a grant administrator. Maybe Mr. Ramos over at Rio Rancho and I know exactly what's happening in his engineering program, and I'm his monitor, right? Our finance office doesn't have that relationship and know what's happening in that engineering program. So what happens is the finance office is looking deeper into the claims for reimbursement, pulling random sample, and then they're identifying, well, wait a minute, Eric, are you really seriously okay with this $1,000 rental car expenditure? What rental car expenditure? And that's what happens to me often. Like, what are you talking about? Louise, get over here. Show me that budget. What's going on? How come I'm getting sign blinded? And we never approved a rental car in the budget, but in there it said travel in the aggregate of $2,500. Then we have to respond to, you approved the expenditure. You didn't know that there was a $1,000 vehicle rental in the expenditure. How is that necessary? How is that reasonable? Is it allocable? And it holds up the process. And in the meantime, the school is still sitting on cash flow issues. Where is my claim for reimbursement? You need to pay me. Why does it take forever to get anything done through Perkins? We hear it. But to mitigate that, and I think schools can identify who you all are that have those issues. I mean, you know who you are. You know who's sitting on cash flow issues. Let's resolve it on the front end and be as clear and precise as we can on the front end with the approval of the budget, and then get the prior approval so that it doesn't hold up the claim for reimbursement process. And that's like the whole second half of like why we need it, to not impose time lapses in cash flow. Advice I have for you, Dr. McGuire, is be in constant communication with us or your grant monitor and working together about what we need to do to establish that. It's pretty simple to pick up the phone and say, hey, do I really need to do X? I have a question. Reach out to us. Okay?
Can we hold off any more questions until after during lunch? This is going to be working lunch.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to not take somebody else's question, I think, in this area.
Renee, we're going to hold off on any more questions since it is a working lunch.
Okay. All right. I'll continue then. Just want to emphasize again that the PED does realize that some of the details for travel may not be known at the time of the application, and or those details can change. So it's important to provide revisions and updates as you know the information comes available, and get approval on any revisions to your budget before spending. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Again, with this line item, you want to include the name of each person, job title, budget amount request, program of study, the details of travel event, which is the name of conference, workshop, meeting location, and the dates of the event. Also, please provide individual receipts. And while we're not opposed or passing judgment on anybody who may like to have an alcoholic beverage, do not include alcoholic beverages on your meal receipts because they won't be approved for reimbursement. You can get a separate receipt and only turn in your meal receipt. Next line item is equipment. Equipment is defined, as an article of tangible property having a useful life of more than 1 year and a unit cost of $5,000 or more. All equipment items should be itemized so that the Career Technical Ed staff is aware of the types required and their respective use to accomplish the objective of a project. Equipment cost may include postage and or transportation fees. What's that? And you also want to keep a current inventory year to year on all items that have been purchased with Perkins funding. That's essential. And if you ever receive a monitoring visit from the PD, you will be asked to supply that. We will review it and check it to make sure that equipment is in place, on campus, and is being utilized for what was stated, as long as it's still an item that is usable with the program of study that was purchased for. An itemized detailed breakdown of equipment costs must be included for each program of study. Please submit your revisions to your application as they occur on a timely basis. Revisions need to be approved prior to purchases to be recognized for reimbursement. Then we look at indirect costs and total indirect cost. All applicants are limited to a maximum of 5% for indirect cost. Please refer to your district or institution's indirect cost rate to calculate allowable costs. It may be less than 5%. However, if it is more than 5%, keep in mind that only 5% is allowable. The indirect costs must be within the 5% administrative costs, not in addition to. Again, an itemized, detailed breakdown of indirect costs must be included for each program of study. I have a few notes that I want to outline to remember when filling out your program of study budgets. Please align your district or institution's budget with approved application. Revise and submit your revisions regularly and on a timely basis. Itemize the following: salaries, fringe benefits, purchase services, supplies and materials, travel, equipment, and indirect costs. Ask yourself, is your purchase an allowable and allocable cost as defined by Perkins funding? And again, we'll have more on this in the afternoon presentation. Submit updates for your budget to your monitor as necessary on a timely basis for approval. Provide documentation to